The bullet traveled for nearly 4 seconds through the thin mountain air, covering a distance that most people couldn't even see clearly with the naked eye. At 3,847 meters, it was a shot that defied physics, challenged military doctrine, and shattered the ego of a general who believed women had no place behind a sniper rifle. But this wasn't just about proving a point. It was about saving lives in a war zone where every decision meant the difference between soldiers coming home or being carried home in flag-draped coffins. Staff Sergeant Elena Rodriguez had been dismissed, mocked, and nearly court-martialed more times than she could count. The men in her unit called her Barbie with a Barrett, never imagining that this 5'4" former college athlete would become the most lethal precision shooter in modern military history. What they didn't know was that Elena had been preparing for this moment her entire life, carrying secrets that would explain why her hands never shook, why her breathing remained steady under pressure, and why she could read wind patterns like others read books. The story of that impossible shot begins not in the mountains of Afghanistan, but in a small Texas town where a young girl learned to hunt deer with her grandfather, where poverty meant that missing your target meant your family went hungry, and where the only way out was through the military. It's a story of resilience, precision, and the moment when everything Elena had ever learned came together in 4 seconds that would change military history forever. But first, you need to understand how a girl from nowhere became someone that a decorated general would both fear and respect, and how one shot at an impossible distance would expose truths about warfare, leadership, and the cost of underestimating someone because of their gender. This is the story of Elena Rodriguez, the Barrett rifle that became an extension of her soul, and the day she proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon in any army isn't the biggest gun. It's the person behind it who refuses to miss when everything depends on making the shot count. Elena Rodriguez learned to shoot before she learned to drive, and by the time she turned 16, there wasn't a deer in 3 counties that felt safe during hunting season. Her grandfather, Miguel Rodriguez, had taught her everything about rifles, patience, and the mathematics of death from a distance. What he hadn't taught her was how to deal with people who would judge her before she ever pulled a trigger. The Rodriguez family lived in Bracketville, Texas, population 1,800 on a good day when the tourists came through to see the Alamo Village movie set. Miguel worked construction when there was work to be had, and Elena's mother Carmen cleaned houses for the wealthy families in San Antonio when she could get the rides. Money was always tight, which meant that when Miguel took Elena hunting, missing wasn't just embarrassing, it was expensive. Every bullet had to count. Every shot had to put food on the table. Elena's first rifle was a beat-up Remington 700 that Miguel had bought at a pawn shop for $40. The scope was scratched, the stock was cracked, and it had a tendency to pull slightly left, but Elena learned to compensate. She spent hours in the backyard shooting at empty soup cans, adjusting for wind, learning to control her breathing, and developing the steady hands that would later make her famous. Miguel would sit in his lawn chair, drinking beer and calling out distances, wind speeds, and target adjustments in Spanish. "Mija, the bullet doesn't care about your feelings," he would say in his thick accent. The bullet only cares about physics. You learn physics, you learn to kill. You don't learn physics, you go hungry. By the time Elena was 12, she could hit a playing card at 200 yards. By 14, she was out shooting grown men at the local shooting competitions. Much to their embarrassment and anger, the men would grumble about beginner's luck and lucky shots until Elena would calmly put 10 rounds through the same hole at 300 yards. Then they would just grumble about girls who didn't know their place. High school was where Elena first encountered the kind of systematic discrimination that would follow her throughout her military career. She wanted to join the rifle team, but Coach Henderson told her that girls weren't built for precision shooting. Their hands were too small, their emotions too unstable, and they didn't have the upper body strength to handle the recoil of serious rifles. Elena politely asked if she could just try out like everyone else. Henderson laughed and made a deal with her. If she could outshoot his best marksman, Tommy Kruger, she could join the team. If she couldn't, she had to promise never to ask again. Elena agreed, and word spread through the school like wildfire. The entire football team showed up to watch the girl get humiliated. The competition was held on a Saturday morning at the school's outdoor range. Henderson set up targets at 100, 200, and 300 yards. Tommy Kruger was the county champion, a a senior who had already received a partial scholarship to shoot for Texas A&M. He was also Elena's ex-boyfriend, which added a layer of drama that the teenage audience found irresistible. Elena showed up with her grandfather's old Remington and a box of hand-loaded ammunition that Miguel had helped her prepare. Tommy had a brand-new Winchester Model 70 with a loopholed scope that cost more than Elena's family made in 2 months. The crowd was clearly on Tommy's side, cheering every time he hit the bullseye and making sarcastic comments when Elena was preparing her shots. The first round was at 100 yards, prone position, 5 shots in 5 minutes. Tommy went first and put all 5 rounds in the 10 ring, with 4 of them touching each other. The crowd erupted in applause, and Henderson nodded approvingly. Elena stepped up to the firing line, adjusted her scope for the distance, and began her shooting sequence. Her first shot hit dead center. The second shot went through the same hole. The third shot expanded the hole slightly. By the fourth shot, the crowd had gone quiet. Elena's fifth and final shot disappeared into the growing hole at the center of the target. When they walked down range to score the targets, Elena's group measured 0.3 inches center to center. Tommy's group, while impressive, measured 0.8 inches. The 200-yard round went the same way, with Elena's shots forming an even tighter group while Tommy began to show signs of pressure. He started rushing his shots, and his breathing became irregular. Elena, meanwhile, seemed to get calmer and more focused with each target. Her groups at 200 yards measured 0.5 inches, while Tommy's had opened up to nearly 2 inches. By the time they reached the 300-yard line, Tommy was visibly frustrated. He kept adjusting his scope, complaining about the wind, and muttering under his breath about his rifle being off. Elena simply lay down in the prone position, studied the wind flags for 30 seconds, and began her sequence. Her 5 shots took exactly 3 minutes and formed a group that measured 0.7 inches center to center. Tommy's final group scattered across the target, with 2 shots barely in the 9 ring and 1 shot that completely missed the scoring area. The crowd stood in stunned silence as Henderson walked down range to verify the scores. When he returned, his face was red with embarrassment and anger. "Well," he said through gritted teeth, "I guess Rodriguez made the team." Elena's 3 years on the rifle team were marked by constant victories and constant friction. She won every competition she entered, set new school records that still stand today, and earned a full scholarship to the University of Texas. But she also endured daily comments about her appearance, her attitude, and her right to be there. Her teammates treated her like a mascot rather than a competitor, and the other school's coaches regularly filed complaints about her eligibility, convinced that no girl could shoot that well without some kind of assistance. The scholarship to UT was supposed to be Elena's ticket to a better life. She planned to study engineering, maybe work for NASA or one of the defense contractors. But during her sophomore year, everything changed when she attended a military recruiting event on campus. A Marine recruiter named Staff Sergeant Johnson was talking about the challenges of modern warfare, the need for precision shooters, and the opportunities available to qualified marksmen. After his presentation, Elena approached Johnson and asked about sniper training. Johnson looked her up and down and chuckled. "Sweetheart, the Marine Corps has plenty of jobs for women. You could be a mechanic, work in communications, maybe even become a pilot if you're really ambitious. But snipers? That's men's work. You wouldn't last a day in sniper school." Elena's face burned with familiar anger and determination. "What if I could outshoot any man in your unit?" Johnson's smile became patronizing. "Look, I'm sure you're a fine shooter. Maybe you hunt with your daddy or shoot skeet at the country club. But combat shooting is different. It's not just about marksmanship. It's about physical strength, mental toughness, and the ability to kill another human being without hesitation. Women just aren't built for that kind of work." Elena pulled out her phone and showed Johnson a video of her hitting targets at 600 yards with a hunting rifle. Johnson's expression changed from amusement to interest to skepticism. "Anybody can make a lucky shot," he said, "and video can be edited." Elena looked him straight in the eye. "Give me your best shooter, your best rifle, and your best excuse when I make you look like an amateur." Johnson thought for a moment, then pulled out a business card. "You know what? I like your attitude, even if you're completely wrong about your abilities. Come to the base next Saturday. I'll set up a little demonstration for you. When you realize what real shooting looks like, maybe you'll consider one of the jobs you're actually qualified for." Elena took the card and shook his hand. "See you Saturday, Staff Sergeant." Bring your best. As she walked away, Elena could hear Johnson talking to another recruiter. Poor kid has no idea what she's getting into. But hey, at least she'll learn some respect for what real Marines can do. Elena didn't tell her grandfather about the challenge until Friday night. Miguel listened to her story while cleaning his own rifle, nodding occasionally but saying nothing until she finished.
"Mija," he said finally, "you remember what I taught you about hunting?"
"Yes, abuelo."
Patience, preparation, and precision. "And what's the most important thing about shooting?"
Elena smiled.
"The shot you don't take is the only one you can't make." Miguel handed her a box of specially loaded ammunition. "These are match-grade rounds I've been saving. Use them tomorrow." "And Elena?" "Yes? Show them that Rodriguez women don't miss when it matters." The next morning, Elena drove to Camp Pendleton with her grandfather's old Remington and a quiet confidence that came from years of proving people wrong. She had no idea that this demonstration would change her life forever, or that the rifle she would soon learn to love would become known as the Barrett MA2A1, a weapon that would make her both famous and feared in equal measure. All she knew was that another man had told her she couldn't do something because she was a woman, and that was never acceptable to Elena Rodriguez. The Marine base was unlike anything Elena had ever seen. The precisely maintained buildings, the spotless vehicles, and the groups of Marines moving with purpose and discipline all spoke of an organization that took itself very seriously. Elena parked her beat-up Honda Civic between two massive military trucks and felt suddenly out of place in her civilian clothes and carrying her grandfather's old rifle case. Staff Sergeant Johnson met her at the visitors center with two other Marines. One was a massive man with arms like tree trunks and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. The other was smaller but moved with the fluid grace of a natural athlete. Johnson introduced them as Sergeant Mills and Corporal Davidson, both members of the base's precision shooting team. "Rodriguez," Johnson said, barely concealing his amusement, "I've got to hand it to you. Not many civilians have the guts to come onto a Marine base and claim they can outshoot our marksmen. I respect that, even if it's completely delusional." Elena shouldered her rifle case and looked at each of the Marines. "I appreciate the opportunity, Staff Sergeant. Where do you want to do this?" Johnson led them to the base's rifle range, which was far more sophisticated than anything Elena had ever used. Electronic targets, precise distance markers, wind measurement equipment, and shooting benches that could be adjusted for height and angle. It was every precision shooter's dream, and Elena felt a momentary pang of envy for the resources these Marines had access to. "Here's how this is going to work," Johnson explained as they walked to the firing line. 3 distances, 300, 500, and 800 yards. 5 shots at each distance. Best aggregate score wins. Sergeant Mills will be shooting for us using one of our M40A5 sniper rifles. Elena nodded and began unpacking her rifle. The Marines watched with barely concealed amusement as she assembled her grandfather's old Remington with its scratched scope and taped stock. When she pulled out Miguel's hand-loaded ammunition, Sergeant Mills laughed out loud. "Jesus, Johnson, where did you find this kid? She's shooting handloads in a rifle that belongs in a museum. This isn't even going to be close." Elena ignored the comment and began preparing her rifle. She checked the scope mounts, verified the 0, and studied the wind flags scattered around the range. The Marines had stopped laughing when they saw how methodically she worked, but Elena could still feel their skepticism. The 300-yard targets went up first. Sergeant Mills shot first, using a rifle that cost more than Elena's car. His 5 shots formed a neat group in the center of the target, all in the 10 ring with 4 of them touching. It was exactly the kind of shooting Elena expected from a trained military marksman. Elena stepped to the firing line and adjusted her rifle on the shooting bench. She spent nearly a minute studying the wind flags and the mirage rising from the hot ground. The Marines watched impatiently as she made tiny adjustments to her scope and checked her ammunition one more time. Her first shot broke the morning silence with the familiar crack of a .308 Winchester. Through her scope, Elena could see that the bullet had hit slightly high and left of center. She made a tiny adjustment to her scope and fired her second shot. This one hit closer to center. The third shot was dead center. The fourth shot went through the same hole. The fifth shot expanded the group slightly but remained in the center of the target. When they walked down range to score the targets, Elena's group measured smaller than Sergeant Mills's. The Marines exchanged glances but said nothing. 300 yards was close enough that a civilian could get lucky. The real test would come at longer distances. The 500-yard targets revealed the difference between casual shooting and serious marksmanship. Sergeant Mills's group opened up significantly, though all 5 shots remained in the 9 and 10 rings. Elena's group actually got tighter as she found her rhythm and began to understand the range conditions. But it was at 800 yards that Elena truly announced herself. At this distance, the targets looked like postage stamps through the scope. Wind became a major factor, and the slight imperfections in ammunition or rifle setup became magnified. Sergeant Mills shot first and managed to keep 4 shots in the scoring rings, but 1 shot went wide and hit in the 7 ring. Elena took her time at 800 yards. She watched the wind flags for several minutes, noting how the wind seemed to shift in intensity, but not direction. She made a calculated adjustment to her scope and settled into her shooting position. The Marines had grown quiet, their earlier jokes replaced by professional interest in what this young woman was about to do. Elena's first shot at 800 yards hit the 9 ring, slightly right of center. She made a tiny adjustment and fired again. The second shot hit dead center in the 10 ring. The third shot went through the same hole. By the 4th shot, the Marines were leaning forward, trying to see through their spotting scopes. Elena's final shot completed a group that measured less than 3 inches at 800 yards, a level of precision that most trained military snipers never achieve. The range fell silent except for the wind moving through the flags. Sergeant Mills stared at his target through binoculars, shaking his head in disbelief. Corporal Davidson was checking Elena's target repeatedly, as if the holes might disappear if he looked away. Staff Sergeant Johnson walked over to Elena, who was calmly packing up her rifle. His expression had changed from amusement to something approaching respect, though Elena could see that he was struggling with what he had just witnessed. "Rodriguez," he said quietly, "that was some fine shooting. Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "My grandfather taught me," Elena replied simply. "He always said that shooting was just applied physics. If you understand the physics, you can make the shot." Johnson nodded slowly. "Have you ever thought about doing this professionally?" Elena looked him straight in the eye. "Every day since I was 16. The question is whether the Marines are ready for someone like me." Johnson was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out another business card. "This is for Captain Williams. She's a recruiter who specializes in placing people in advanced training programs. Tell her I sent you, and tell her what happened here today." As Elena drove away from Camp Pendleton, she could see the Marines in her rear-view mirror, still standing at the rifle range and discussing what they had just witnessed. She had no way of knowing that within 6 months she would be back at this same base, beginning the most challenging training of her life. She also had no way of knowing that the rifle she would soon master, a massive .50 caliber Barrett MA2A1, would become the weapon that would make her famous throughout the military. All she knew was that once again, she had proven that being underestimated was often the best advantage a person could have. Elena Rodriguez arrived at Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego on a Tuesday morning in September, carrying everything she owned in 2 duffel bags and a rifle case that the drill instructors immediately confiscated. She was one of only 12 women in a company of 80 recruits, and the only one who had specifically requested assignment to advanced marksmanship training after boot camp. The transformation from college student to Marine was brutal for everyone, but Elena discovered that being a woman in this environment brought additional challenges that no amount of preparation could have anticipated. The physical training was designed to break down recruits and rebuild them as Marines, but the psychological pressure of being constantly watched, evaluated, and doubted because of her gender added another layer of difficulty. Drill instructor Sergeant Lopez took a special interest in Elena from the first day. He had read her recruitment file and knew about her demonstration at Camp Pendleton, which made him suspicious rather than impressed. During the first week of training, he pulled her aside for a private conversation that would set the tone for the next 13 weeks. "Rodriguez," he said, circling her like a predator, "I know all about your little show at Pendleton. You impressed some people with your civilian shooting skills, and now you think you're hot stuff. Let me explain something to you. This isn't a county fair shooting competition. This is the United States Marine Corps, and we don't have time for prima donnas who think they're special because they can poke holes in paper targets." Elena stood at attention and stared straight ahead. Yes, drill instructor. You think because you can shoot that you're ready to be a Marine sniper? Lopez's voice rose to the shouting level that all drill instructors seem to prefer. Being a sniper isn't just about shooting. It's about crawling through mud for days without being detected. It's about carrying a 40-pound rifle and 100 pounds of gear through mountains that would kill most people. It's about killing enemy combatants from distances where you can see their faces through your scope. Do you think you have what it takes for that kind of work, Rodriguez? Elena's response came from somewhere deep inside, a place where her grandfather's voice and her own determination had merged into something unbreakable. I guess we'll find out, drill instructor. Lopez smiled for the first time since Elena had met him. It wasn't a pleasant smile. Yes, Rodriguez, I guess we will. Boot camp tested every aspect of Elena's physical and mental toughness. The obstacle courses, forced marches, and combat training pushed her body beyond anything she had experienced in civilian athletics. But it was the psychological warfare that proved most challenging. The drill instructors seemed determined to break her confidence, constantly questioning whether she belonged there and suggesting that she would be happier in a more appropriate military occupation. Elena's fellow recruits were initially skeptical of her presence, but gradually came to respect her determination and competence. She never finished first in the physical training events, but she never finished last either. More importantly, she never quit, never complained, and never asked for special treatment because of her gender. During the long days of training, Elena found herself forming bonds with other recruits who had also been underestimated, for various reasons. The Marine Corps marksmanship training was where Elena truly began to distinguish herself. The standard M16A4 service rifle was familiar enough to Elena's experience with civilian rifles, but the military approach to shooting was far more systematic and technical than anything she had learned from her grandfather. The instructors taught her about minute of angle calculations, ballistic coefficients, and environmental factors that could affect bullet trajectory over long distances. Elena's scores during the qualification exercises were consistently perfect or near perfect, which earned her recognition as the honor graduate from her platoon's marksmanship training. More importantly, it caught the attention of Captain Sarah Williams, the advanced training recruiter who Staff Sergeant Johnson had recommended. Captain Williams visited Elena during the final week of boot camp to discuss her future assignments. Williams was a career Marine who had broken her own share of barriers during 15 years in the Corps. She was also one of the few people in the military who understood both the potential value and the political complications of putting a woman through sniper training. Rodriguez, Williams said during their private meeting, "Your marksmanship scores are among the best I've seen in 10 years of recruiting for special programs. Your boot camp performance shows that you have the physical and mental toughness required for advanced training. But I need to be completely honest with you about what you're requesting." Williams pulled out a thick folder and spread several photographs across the table. They showed Marines in full combat gear crawling through mud, carrying massive rifles across desert terrain, and lying motionless in camouflaged positions for hours at a time. Sniper training is 13 weeks of the most demanding military instruction in the world. The physical requirements alone eliminate about 60% of the men who attempt it. The psychological pressure breaks another 20%. Of the men who do graduate, most of them are elite athletes or have extensive combat experience. You would be the first woman ever to attempt this training. Elena studied the photographs carefully. She could see the exhaustion and determination in the faces of the Marines, the massive weight of their equipment, and the harsh environments where they operated. None of it looked easy, but none of it looked impossible either. "What's the washout rate for people who make it past the physical requirements?" Elena asked. "About 50%, Williams replied. "Most of them fail the stalking exercises or the psychological evaluations. A few fail the advanced marksmanship requirements, though that's rare for people who make it that far into the program." Elena looked up from the photographs. "Captain Williams, has anyone ever told you that you couldn't do something because you were a woman?" Williams smiled grimly. "Every day for the first 10 years of my career." "Why? Then you understand why I have to try this. Not just for me, but for every woman who comes after me. Someone has to be first." Williams gathered up the photographs and closed the folder. "Rodriguez, if I send you to sniper training and you fail, it won't just reflect poorly on you. It will be used as evidence that women can't handle this kind of work, and it might be years before another woman gets the opportunity. If I send you and you succeed, you'll face a different kind of challenge. You'll be constantly scrutinized, constantly tested, and constantly asked to prove that your success wasn't just luck or special treatment. Elena had heard variations of this conversation throughout her life. The burden of representation, the pressure to be perfect, and the knowledge that her failures would be magnified while her successes would be minimized. It was exhausting, but it was also familiar. Captain, I can't control what other people think or how they interpret my performance. I can only control my own effort and preparation. If you give me this opportunity, I promise you that I won't quit, I won't make excuses, and I won't give anyone a reason to say that women can't do this job. William stared at Elena for a long moment, weighing risks and possibilities that extended far beyond one recruit's ambitions. Finally, she picked up a pen and signed a form that Elena couldn't see. Congratulations, Marine. You're going to sniper school. God help us both. Elena's orders came through 2 weeks after graduation from boot camp. She would have a month of leave before reporting to the Scout Sniper School at Marine Corps Base Quantico. Elena used most of that time to prepare physically and mentally for the challenge ahead. She ran 10 miles every morning, spent hours at the rifle range perfecting her marksmanship skills, and studied everything she could find about military sniping techniques. Her grandfather, Miguel, was both proud and worried about Elena's assignment. He had served in Vietnam and understood the realities of combat in ways that Elena could only imagine. During their conversations about her upcoming training, he shared stories about friends who had never come home and battles where split-second decisions determined who lived and who died. Mija, he told her during one of their evening conversations, shooting is the easy part of what you're going to learn. The hard part is living with what you've done after you pull the trigger. Make sure you're ready for that responsibility. Elena arrived at Quantico on a cold October morning with the same 2 duffel bags she had carried to boot camp, plus a new addition. A custom rifle case containing a Barrett M8 2A1.50 caliber sniper rifle that had been issued to her for training. The Barrett was unlike any rifle she had ever handled, nearly 5 feet long, weighing 30 pounds when loaded, and capable of putting a bullet through an engine block at 2,000 yards. The Scout Sniper School class consisted of 32 Marines, all male except for Elena. The instructors were experienced combat veterans who had earned their reputations in Iraq and Afghanistan. The school's commander, Major Thompson, addressed the class on the first day with a speech that Elena would never forget. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thompson began, then paused and looked directly at Elena. "Excuse me, lady and gentlemen. You are here because someone believes you have the potential to become Marine Corps Scout snipers. Over the next 13 weeks, we will determine whether that belief is justified." Thompson gestured to a wall covered with photographs of previous graduates. These Marines have served in every major conflict of the past 20 years. They have saved countless lives through precision fire, intelligence gathering, and forward observation. They have also taken lives when necessary to protect their fellow Marines and accomplish their missions. This is not a game, and this is not a test. This is preparation for combat, where your skills will determine whether you and your teammates come home alive. The Major's eyes found Elena again. Some of you may be wondering about the unique composition of this class. Let me be clear about something. There are no participation trophies in this school. There is no extra credit for effort, no allowances for gender, and no second chances for failure. You will all be held to exactly the same standards, and you will all sink or swim based on your own abilities. Elena felt the weight of 31 pairs of eyes studying her reaction to Thompson's comments. She kept her expression neutral, and her attention focused on the Major, but she could sense the mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and resentment from her classmates. The first week of sniper school was designed to eliminate candidates who didn't belong there. The physical training was more intense than boot camp, with long runs in full gear, obstacle courses that seemed designed by sadists, and strength training that left everyone exhausted. The academic requirements were equally demanding, with classes on ballistics, weather patterns, camouflage techniques, and target identification that required constant study and memorization. Elena discovered that her biggest challenge wasn't keeping up with the physical requirements or understanding the academic material. Her biggest challenge was dealing with the social dynamics of being the only woman in a group of elite male Marines who weren't sure they wanted her there. Some of her classmates were openly supportive, recognizing that Elena had earned her place through performance rather than politics. Others were openly hostile, convinced that her presence was part of some social engineering experiment that would lower standards for everyone. The majority fell somewhere in between, taking a wait-and-see attitude that would be determined by Elena's performance under pressure. The breakthrough moment came during the third week of training, during an exercise called unknown distance stalking. Students were required to crawl undetected across varied terrain to reach shooting positions within 600 yards of instructors who were actively searching for them with binoculars and spotting scopes. Once in position, they had to take a single shot at a target whose distance and wind conditions they had to calculate on their own. Elena's stalking partner was a Marine named Corporal Jake Martinez, who had initially been one of her most vocal critics. Martinez was convinced that Elena would slow him down or compromise their mission, because women weren't built for the physical demands of field operations. The exercise would require them to crawl nearly 2 miles through woods across open fields and up a rocky hillside without being detected. The exercise began at dawn, with Elena and Martinez starting from a position where they could barely see their objective through binoculars. They would have until sunset to reach their shooting position and take their shots. Detection by the instructors meant automatic failure for both team members. Elena had spent the previous evening studying topographic maps of the area, identifying potential routes and considering how the sun's movement would affect shadows and concealment throughout the day. Martinez had dismissed her suggestions, insisting that his experience in Iraq made him better qualified to plan their approach. For the first hour of movement, Martinez set a pace that was too fast for stealth and chose routes that exposed them to observation from multiple directions. Elena followed without comment, but she could see that his approach was going to get them detected long before they reached their objective. When Martinez finally called for a rest break, Elena decided to speak up. "Corporal Martinez," she whispered, "I think we need to adjust our route. The sun angle is going to put us in direct view of the observation post if we continue on this heading."
Martinez glared at her. "Rodriguez, I've been doing this since before you knew what a rifle was.
Just follow my lead and try not to slow us down." 20 minutes later, they were detected by an instructor with binoculars and ordered to return to the starting point. Martinez was furious, convinced that Elena had somehow given away their position. Elena said nothing during the long walk back to base, but she spent that evening developing an alternative plan for their next attempt. The second day of the exercise began the same way, with Martinez insisting on his approach despite the previous day's failure. Elena followed for the first mile, then made a decision that would change everything between them. When Martinez paused for a map check, Elena quietly disappeared into the woods, using a route she had identified the previous evening. Elena's route took advantage of natural terrain features, shadow patterns, and the instructor's likely observation points. She moved slowly and deliberately, sometimes taking 10 minutes to travel 50 yards when the situation required extreme caution. By midday, she had covered more ground than she and Martinez had managed together in 2 full days. Martinez discovered Elena's absence an hour after she had left. He spent the rest of the day searching for her, assuming that she had gotten lost or injured. When he finally returned to base that evening, he was prepared to report Elena as missing in action. Elena, meanwhile, had reached the objective area by mid-afternoon. She spent 2 hours in careful observation, identifying the exact location of each instructor and calculating the wind conditions at her target. As the sun began to set, she took her position and waited for the signal to fire. The shot was at 847 yards, in variable wind conditions, with a target that appeared to be no larger than a dinner plate through her scope. Elena took her time calculating the ballistic solution, adjusting for the environmental conditions, and controlling her breathing. When she squeezed the trigger, the bullet's impact was clearly visible through her scope, dead center in the target. The instructors spent 10 minutes searching for Elena's position with their spotting scopes and binoculars. She was so well concealed that they couldn't locate her even after she had fired. Finally, one of the instructors keyed his radio and announced, "Unknown shooter, make yourself known." Elena stood up from her position less than 400 yards from the observation post. The instructors had been looking directly at her location for the past hour without detecting her presence. When she walked into their position, still carrying her Barrett rifle and wearing a ghillie suit she had constructed from local vegetation, Major Thompson was waiting for her. "Rodriguez," Thompson said, "where the hell is your partner?" "I don't know, sir. Corporal Martinez and I became separated during the stalk." Thompson studied Elena for a long moment. "Rodriguez, did you abandon your partner?" Elena chose her words carefully.
Sir, Corporal Martinez made it clear that he didn't want my input on tactics or route selection. When it became apparent that his approach wasn't going to succeed, I made the decision to complete the mission using alternative methods. Thompson's expression was unreadable.
Rodriguez, in combat, Marines don't abandon their partners. Ever.
No matter how incompetent or stubborn they might be. Elena felt her heart sink. She had completed the most challenging exercise of the course, but she had apparently violated one of the fundamental principles of Marine Corps operations.
Yes, sir, I understand.
However, Thompson continued, your shot was perfect, your concealment was exceptional, and your individual performance demonstrates that you understand the principles we're trying to teach. Martinez's failure to adapt his tactics after being detected yesterday suggests that he may not be suited for this type of work.
Elena said nothing, unsure whether she was being praised or criticized.
Rodriguez, you will repeat this exercise tomorrow with a different partner.
Martinez will be dropped from the program.
Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
As Elena walked back to the barracks, she felt a mixture of relief and guilt. She had proven that she could succeed at the most demanding aspects of sniper training, but she had also been responsible for ending another Marine's career ambitions. Word of the day's events spread quickly through the class, and Elena found herself facing a new set of challenges in her relationships with the other students. Some of her classmates now viewed her with increased respect, recognizing that she had accomplished something that none of them had managed. Others saw her as ruthless and untrustworthy, willing to sacrifice a partner's career for her own success. Elena realized that every decision she made was being scrutinized and interpreted through the lens of her gender, and that she would never be judged simply as another Marine trying to earn her place in an elite unit. But as she cleaned her Barrett rifle that evening, Elena also realized that she was becoming the sniper she had always dreamed of being. The rifle felt natural in her hands now, and the complex calculations required for long-distance shooting had become second nature. More importantly, she was developing the patience, discipline, and mental toughness that would be required for combat operations. Elena had no way of knowing that her reputation was already spreading beyond the sniper school, or that certain generals were beginning to pay attention to the woman who could make impossible shots with a rifle that most men could barely lift. And she also had no way of knowing that within 2 years, she would be in Afghanistan facing a situation where everything she had learned would be tested under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Elena Rodriguez stepped off the transport plane at Bagram Airfield on a dusty morning in March, carrying her Barrett M82A1 in a custom case and wearing the same determined expression that had carried her through sniper school. Afghanistan was unlike anywhere she had ever been. The air was thin and dry, the mountains stretched endlessly in every direction, and the constant sound of helicopters and military vehicles reminded everyone that this was a war zone. Her assignment was to Forward Operating Base Chapman, a remote outpost in Khost Province that sat less than 10 miles from the Pakistani border. Chapman was home to about 800 American and coalition forces, surrounded by mountains that provided perfect cover for Taliban fighters who seemed to know the terrain better than the locals who had lived there for generations. Elena was assigned to 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines, where she would serve as a designated marksman attached to various patrol units as needed. Her commanding officer was Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, a career Marine who had served 3 previous tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. Morrison had specifically requested Elena for his unit after reviewing her sniper school records and hearing about her performance from Major Thompson. Morrison's first meeting with Elena set the tone for what would become a complicated professional relationship. He was impressed by her qualifications but concerned about the practical and political implications of having the first female Marine sniper in his unit. Rodriguez, Morrison said during their initial briefing, I'm going to be completely honest with you about the situation here. This unit has been operating together for 6 months. They trust each other, they know each other's capabilities, and they've developed tactics that work in this environment. Your presence is going to disrupt that dynamic, whether we like it or not. Elena had expected this conversation and had prepared her response during the long flight from California. Sir, I understand the challenges of integrating into an established unit. I'm not here to change anyone's tactics or prove any political points. I'm here to provide precision fire support and help bring everyone home safely. Morrison studied Elena for a moment, weighing her response against his own concerns. Rodriguez, the Taliban fighters in this area are some of the most experienced and dangerous in Afghanistan. They've been fighting in these mountains for decades, and they know how to use the terrain to their advantage. Our patrols face ambushes, sniper attacks, and improvised explosive devices on a regular basis. This isn't a training exercise where mistakes mean a low score.
Mistakes here get people killed. Elena nodded. Yes, sir. I understand the stakes. I hope you do, Morrison replied.
Because your first assignment is going to be with Alpha Company's next patrol. They're investigating reports of Taliban movement in the Spingar Mountains, about 15 kilometers north of here. It's rough terrain, hostile population, and exactly the kind of place where a sniper can make the difference between a successful mission and a disaster. Alpha Company was led by Captain Mike Stevens, a young officer from Georgia who had earned his unit's respect through aggressive leadership and genuine concern for his Marines' welfare. Stevens was skeptical about Elena's assignment to his company, not because of her gender, but because of her lack of combat experience. In his view, Afghanistan was no place for on-the-job training, regardless of how impressive someone's qualifications looked on paper. Stevens' briefing for Elena was tactical and direct. Rodriguez, my job is to bring my Marines back alive. Your job is to provide overwatch and eliminate threats that my riflemen can't handle. This isn't about proving anything or making history. This is about staying alive and completing our mission objectives. Elena's first patrol with Alpha Company took place on a Tuesday morning in late March. The objective was to investigate a village called Nangalam, where intelligence reports suggested Taliban fighters were using local compounds to store weapons and plan attacks against coalition forces. The patrol consisted of 24 Marines, including Elena as the designated marksman. The march to Nangalam took 6 hours across terrain that challenged everyone's physical conditioning. The mountains of Afghanistan were unlike anything Elena had trained for, with altitude that left everyone breathing hard and rocky terrain that made every step a conscious decision. Elena's Barrett rifle added 30 pounds to her load, but she was determined not to show any sign of struggle or fatigue. The patrol's route took them through valleys that provided natural ambush sites, across ridgelines that offered excellent fields of fire for enemy snipers, and past villages where the population's loyalty was questionable at best. Elena found herself constantly scanning for potential threats, calculating distances and wind conditions, and identifying positions where she could provide effective overwatch for her unit. The first sign of trouble came when the patrol was still 2 kilometers from Nangalam. Point Man Lance Corporal Williams spotted movement on a ridgeline about 800 meters to the north. Captain Stevens called for a halt and used his binoculars to study the area, while Elena set up her rifle to provide precision observation. Through her scope, Elena could see 3 figures moving along the ridge. They were carrying what appeared to be AK-47 rifles and seemed to be tracking the patrol's movement. Elena keyed her radio and reported her observations to Captain Stevens. Sir, I have eyes on 3 military-age males with weapons on the North Ridge. Range is approximately 825 meters. They appear to be conducting surveillance on our position. Stevens considered his options. The figures on the ridge weren't actively engaging the patrol, but their presence suggested that an ambush might be developing. The standard rules of engagement required positive identification of hostile intent before engaging targets, but waiting too long could put the entire patrol at risk. Rodriguez, can you make that shot if I give you the order? Elena studied the range conditions carefully. The wind was variable, blowing from left to right at about 8 to 10 miles per hour. The altitude would affect the bullet's trajectory, and the steep angle of the shot would require adjustment to her normal calculations. Most challenging of all, the targets were moving, requiring her to lead them appropriately. Sir, affirmative. I have a clear shot at the lead figure. Recommend engaging if they demonstrate hostile intent. Stevens made the decision that would define Elena's reputation in Afghanistan. Rodriguez, if they point their weapons in our direction, you are cleared hot. Take the shot. Elena settled into her shooting position and began tracking the lead figure through her scope. She calculated the range, wind conditions, and angle of engagement, while keeping one eye on the tactical situation developing around her. The other Marines in the patrol had taken defensive positions and were waiting for orders from Captain Stevens. The moment Elena had been training for her entire life arrived when the lead figure on the ridge raised his rifle and began scanning the area where the patrol was positioned.
Elena could see through her scope that the man was looking directly at their location and appeared to be preparing to fire. Elena's training took over. She adjusted her point of aim to account for the wind and distance, took a deep breath, released half of it, and squeezed the trigger with the smooth, steady pressure that her grandfather had taught her years earlier. The Barrett M82A1 erupted with a sound that echoed off the mountains like thunder. Through her scope, Elena watched as the .50 caliber bullet covered the distance to its target in just over a second. The impact was immediate and decisive. The figure on the ridge dropped instantly, and the other two men scattered for cover. Elena immediately began searching for the other targets while Captain Stevens called for the patrol to advance toward the ridge. The engagement had lasted less than 30 seconds, but it had announced Elena's presence in Afghanistan in a way that would be talked about for months afterward. The patrol reached the ridge an hour later and found the body of a Taliban fighter, armed with a Russian-made sniper rifle and several magazines of ammunition. Intelligence materials found on the fighter suggested that he had been part of a larger group planning an attack on coalition forces in the area. Captain Stevens' after-action report on Elena's performance was brief but significant. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's precision fire eliminated an immediate threat to the patrol and likely prevented a larger engagement. Her shot placement was accurate and her tactical decision-making was sound. Rodriguez demonstrated the skills and judgment required for combat operations in this environment. Word of Elena's first combat engagement spread quickly through the coalition forces in eastern Afghanistan. The details became embellished with each telling. The range grew from 825 meters to over 1,000. The conditions became more challenging, and Elena's target became a notorious Taliban commander rather than an unknown fighter. But the core facts remained consistent. The first female Marine sniper had made her first combat kill, and she had done it with a single shot that saved American lives. Elena's second major engagement came 3 weeks later during a patrol in the Tora Bora Mountains. Alpha Company had been tasked with investigating cave complexes that intelligence reports suggested were being used as Taliban training facilities. The mission was complicated by the terrain: narrow valleys, steep slopes, and rocky outcroppings that provided countless hiding places for enemy fighters. The patrol had been moving for 2 days when they encountered their first major resistance. A squad of Marines led by Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, no relation to Elena, had become pinned down by sniper fire from multiple directions. The Taliban fighters had positioned themselves in caves and behind rock formations that provided excellent cover while giving them clear fields of fire on the Marines below. Elena was positioned on a ridgeline about 600 meters from the engagement when Captain Stevens radioed for her assessment of the situation. Through her scope, Elena could see muzzle flashes from at least 4 different positions where Taliban snipers were engaging the trapped Marines. The range and terrain made precise shooting extremely difficult, but Elena could see that the Marines below were running out of time and options.
Sir, I have positive identification on 4 enemy fighting positions. Range varies from 650 to 900 meters.
I can engage, but I'll need to relocate after each shot to avoid counter-battery fire. Stevens approved Elena's plan, and she began what would become known as the Tora Bora turkey shoot in Marine Corps circles.
Elena's first shot eliminated a Taliban sniper who had been firing from a cave entrance at 678 meters.
Her second shot, taken from a position 200 meters away, dropped another fighter who had been using a rock outcropping for cover. The Taliban fighters quickly realized that they were being hunted by a sniper with superior equipment and training. They began shifting positions and trying to identify Elena's location, but her movement techniques and concealment skills made her nearly impossible to locate. Over the course of 4 hours, Elena eliminated 6 Taliban fighters while moving constantly to avoid detection and return fire. The engagement ended when the surviving Taliban fighters withdrew deeper into the mountain caves, allowing the trapped Marines to extract safely. Elena's performance during the Tora Bora engagement established her reputation as one of the most effective snipers operating in Afghanistan. More importantly, it demonstrated her ability to operate independently under extreme pressure, while maintaining the tactical awareness needed to support larger operations. Elena's third major engagement was the one that would bring her to the attention of General Harrison and set up the confrontation that would define her career. The mission began as a routine reconnaissance patrol, but escalated into a multi-day siege that would test every aspect of Elena's training and experience. The patrol's objective was to observe a mountain pass that intelligence reports suggested was being used by Taliban forces to move supplies and personnel between Afghanistan and Pakistan. The observation post was located on a ridgeline that provided excellent visibility of the pass, but was extremely isolated and difficult to defend if attacked. Elena's team for this mission consisted of 4 Marines, herself as the designated marksman, Sergeant Mike Thompson as the team leader, Lance Corporal David Kim as the radio operator, and Private First Class Jake Morrison as the security specialist. They were inserted by helicopter on a Sunday night and planned to maintain observation for 72 hours before extraction. The first indication that something was wrong came on Tuesday morning, when Kim intercepted Taliban radio communications suggesting that the observation team had been compromised. The messages, translated by intelligence specialists at the main base, indicated that a large Taliban force was moving to surround and eliminate the Marine observation team. Thompson made the decision to call for immediate extraction, but the response from base was not what the team expected. Weather conditions had deteriorated rapidly, and helicopter operations were suspended until visibility improved. The observation team was on their own for at least 24 hours, possibly longer. Elena spent Tuesday afternoon studying the terrain around their position and identifying the most likely approaches that attacking Taliban forces would use. The ridgeline offered some natural defensive advantages, but it could be overwhelmed by a determined attack with superior numbers. More problematically, the team's ammunition supply was limited, and Elena had only 40 rounds for her Barrett rifle. The attack began at dawn on Wednesday morning with mortar rounds that forced the Marines to take cover in a rocky outcropping near the crest of the ridge. Elena could see Taliban fighters moving up the slopes on 3 sides of their position, using the terrain skillfully to minimize their exposure to defensive fire. Through her scope, Elena began identifying priority targets among the attacking forces. She could see what appeared to be commanders directing the movement of other fighters, weapons specialists setting up crew-served weapons, and snipers trying to establish firing positions that would dominate the Marines' defensive position. Elena's first shots of the engagement eliminated 2 Taliban commanders who were coordinating the attack from positions about 400 meters below the ridge. Her third shot destroyed a heavy machine gun that had been set up to provide covering fire for the attacking infantry. Each shot forced Elena to change positions to avoid counter-battery fire from Taliban marksmen who were actively hunting her. The engagement continued for 6 hours, with Elena methodically eliminating key targets, while the other Marines provided security and called for support that couldn't arrive due to the weather conditions. Elena's Barrett rifle proved devastating against the Taliban forces, but her ammunition supply was dwindling rapidly. By early afternoon, Elena was down to her last 10 rounds when she spotted movement on a distant ridgeline that made her heart stop. Through her scope, she could see a figure in military-style clothing setting up what appeared to be a large-caliber sniper rifle pointed directly at her team's position. Elena calculated the range to the distant sniper at over 1,200 meters, far beyond the effective range of most weapons but well within the capabilities of her Barrett rifle if she could make the necessary adjustments for the extreme distance and mountain conditions. The shot would require every bit of skill and experience she had developed over years of training in combat. Elena spent several minutes studying the wind conditions, the angle of engagement, and the movement patterns of her target. The Taliban sniper was good. He had chosen an excellent position and was using proper concealment techniques. But Elena had advantages in equipment, training, and experience that she was prepared to use. When Elena squeezed the trigger, she knew immediately that the shot was perfect. The bullet's flight time at that range was over 2 seconds, enough time for Elena to watch its impact through her scope. The Taliban sniper dropped instantly, and his rifle tumbled down the mountainside. The elimination of the enemy sniper effectively ended the Taliban attack. Without their long-range fire support and having lost most of their leadership to Elena's precision shooting, the remaining fighters began withdrawing from the area. Elena had used 37 of her 40 Barrett rounds during the engagement, accounting for at least 14 confirmed kills and several probable kills. The weather cleared that evening, allowing helicopters to extract Elena's team after nearly 4 days in isolation. Elena's performance during what became known as the Ridgeline Stand was documented in multiple after-action reports and intelligence assessments. The engagement had demonstrated not only Elena's exceptional marksmanship skills but also her ability to function as a force multiplier under the most challenging combat conditions. More importantly,
The ridgeline stand had been observed by unmanned aerial vehicles that were monitoring the area for intelligence purposes. The footage of Elena's long-range shots and tactical movement was reviewed by senior military leaders, including General Robert Harrison, who was responsible for special operations in eastern Afghanistan. General Harrison had built his career on aggressive tactics, traditional military values, and a deep skepticism about social engineering experiments that he believed compromised military effectiveness. When he learned that a female Marine sniper was operating in his area of responsibility, he was determined to personally evaluate her performance and determine whether she represented a valuable asset or a dangerous distraction. Elena had no knowledge of the attention her performance was attracting at the highest levels of military command. She was focused on preparing for her next mission and continuing to prove herself as a valuable member of Alpha Company. But events were already in motion that would bring her face-to-face with General Harrison in a confrontation that would test everything she had learned about shooting, leadership, and standing up for herself, in a world that still questioned whether women belonged in combat. The stage was being set for a demonstration that would become legendary in Marine Corps history. A shot at a distance that most people considered impossible, taken under conditions that would challenge the best marksman in the world, witnessed by a general who was convinced that women couldn't do the job. Elena Rodriguez was about to become the center of a debate that extended far beyond marksmanship and into the fundamental questions about who gets to serve their country in combat and how that service should be measured. General Robert Harrison arrived at Forward Operating Base Chapman on a Thursday morning in late May, flying in on a Black Hawk helicopter with an entourage that included his aide-de-camp, 2 intelligence officers, and a public affairs specialist whose job was to document the general's visits for military publications. Harrison was an imposing figure, 6 feet 3 inches tall, with silver hair and the kind of bearing that commanded attention from everyone in the room. Elena Rodriguez first learned about the general's visit during the morning briefing with Alpha Company. Captain Stevens announced that General Harrison would be conducting a comprehensive review of the unit's operations with particular attention to recent engagement reports and tactical innovations. Stevens did not mention that Elena's combat record was the primary reason for the general's visit, but Elena suspected that her presence at Chapman was not coincidental timing. Harrison's first stop was Lieutenant Colonel Morrison's office, where he spent 2 hours reviewing operational reports, casualty statistics, and intelligence assessments. The general's questions focused heavily on the unit's use of designated marksmen, the effectiveness of long-range precision fire, and what he called unconventional personnel assignments. Morrison knew exactly what Harrison was getting at, and he was prepared to defend Elena's performance with detailed documentation. "General," Morrison said, spreading Elena's service record across his desk, "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez has been an outstanding addition to this unit. Her marksmanship scores are exceptional, her tactical decision-making has been sound, and her combat performance has exceeded all expectations. She saved American lives and eliminated significant threats to our operations." Harrison studied Elena's file with the expression of a man looking for problems rather than successes. "Morrison, I don't doubt that Rodriguez can shoot. What I question is whether having women in combat roles creates more problems than it solves. What happens to unit cohesion when you introduce sexual tension? What happens to decision-making when male Marines feel protective toward female colleagues? And what happens to our combat effectiveness when we prioritize political correctness over military necessity?" Morrison had anticipated this line of questioning and had his response prepared. "Sir, I can only speak to my direct observations of this unit's performance. Rodriguez has been integrated into our operations without any of the problems you're describing. The Marines treat her as a fellow professional, and she's earned their respect through performance rather than politics." Harrison was not convinced. "Morrison, you're telling me what you think I want to hear, but I need to see the reality for myself. I want to observe Rodriguez in action, set up a demonstration that will show me what she can actually do under realistic conditions." Morrison felt a knot forming in his stomach. "Sir, what kind of demonstration did you have in mind?" "I want to see her engage targets at maximum range under field conditions. I want to see how she handles pressure when she knows she's being evaluated. And I want to see whether she can perform at the same level as our best male marksman." Harrison's tone made it clear that this was not a request. Morrison spent the rest of the day working with his staff to design a demonstration that would showcase Elena's abilities while satisfying Harrison's requirements. The challenge was creating a scenario that was realistic enough to be meaningful but controlled enough to be safe. After several hours of planning, Morrison settled on a long-range shooting exercise that would test Elena's skills under the most demanding conditions possible. The demonstration was scheduled for the following morning at a range complex about 10 kilometers from the main base. The shooting positions were located on a ridgeline that offered clear fields of fire across a valley to targets positioned at various distances up to 2,000 meters. Harrison would observe the exercise from a command post equipped with high-powered spotting scopes and communication equipment. Elena learned about the demonstration during her evening briefing with Captain Stevens. Stevens was clearly uncomfortable with the situation but tried to present it as a routine training exercise.
Rodriguez, Stevens began carefully. Tomorrow morning you'll be participating in a long-range marksmanship demonstration for some visiting senior officers. It's basically a chance to show off your skills and represent the unit well.
Elena could read between the lines. Sir, is this about General Harrison? I heard he was visiting the base to evaluate our operations.
Stevens nodded. Elena, I'm going to be straight with you.
General Harrison has some concerns about women in combat roles, and he specifically requested to observe your performance. This demonstration is essentially a test to determine whether you belong here. Elena felt the familiar mixture of anger and determination that had driven her throughout her military career. Once again, she was being asked to prove herself because of her gender, rather than being evaluated on her existing record of performance. But she also recognized that this was an opportunity to influence policy at the highest levels of military leadership. Captain, what are the parameters of this demonstration? Stevens pulled out a folder containing the exercise plan. Multiple targets at distances from 800 to 2,000 meters, variable wind conditions, time limits for each engagement. And you'll be shooting alongside Gunnery Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, no relation, who's considered one of the best marksmen in the Marine Corps. Aylin studied the exercise parameters and felt her confidence building. The distances were challenging but well within the capabilities of her Barrett rifle. The time limits were reasonable for a trained sniper. Most importantly, the conditions were similar to actual combat engagements she had already successfully completed. Sir, who selected Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez as my comparison shooter? Stevens looked uncomfortable. That was General Harrison's choice. Rodriguez has 15 years of experience, multiple combat deployments, and a reputation as one of the finest marksmen in the Corps. I think the general wanted to ensure that the comparison was fair and objective. Elena understood the subtext. General Harrison had selected an opponent who was almost certain to outperform her, thereby proving his point about women's limitations in combat roles. But Elena also knew something that Harrison probably didn't. She had been consistently outperforming male Marines since she was 16 years old, and pressure situations tended to bring out her best rather than her worst. Elena spent that evening preparing for the demonstration with the same methodical approach she had used throughout her career. She studied the weather forecast, calculated ballistic solutions for various distances, and mentally rehearsed the shooting sequences she would use. She also cleaned and inspected her Barrett rifle with obsessive attention to detail, ensuring that every component was functioning perfectly. The morning of the demonstration dawned clear and cold, with light winds that would make long-range shooting challenging but manageable. Elena arrived at the range complex at 0600 hours, 2 hours before the scheduled start time, to study the terrain and wind conditions. She was surprised to find Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez already there, conducting his own preparation. Gunnery Sergeant Mike Rodriguez was a career Marine from Texas who had earned his reputation through 3 combat deployments and countless training exercises. He was also, Elena discovered, a gentleman who was uncomfortable with the political implications of their demonstration. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, he said, approaching Elena with a respectful nod. I want you to know that I think this whole exercise is bullshit. You've already proven yourself in combat, and you shouldn't have to do it again just because some general has issues with women in the military. Elena appreciated his honesty but was focused on the task ahead. Gunny, I've been proving myself to skeptical men my entire life. This is just one more chance to do what I do best. Rodriguez smiled grimly.
Well, I'll tell you this much. I've reviewed your combat record, and I'm not looking forward to getting shown up by someone half my age.
But I'll give you my best shot because that's what you deserve.
General Harrison arrived at 0800 hours with his entourage and immediately established himself at the command observation post. Elena could see him through her spotting scope, studying her position with binoculars and discussing something with his staff. The knowledge that her career was being evaluated by someone who had already decided that women didn't belong in combat added an extra layer of pressure to an already challenging situation. The demonstration began with targets at 800 meters, a distance that both shooters should handle easily under normal conditions. Elena and Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez would each engage 5 targets, with scoring based on accuracy and time to engagement. Elena would shoot first, followed by Rodriguez, with General Harrison observing through high-powered optics. Elena settled into her shooting position and began her pre-shot routine. She studied the wind flags, calculated the ballistic solution, and adjusted her scope for the distance and conditions. Through her scope, the targets looked small but clearly defined. Elena took a deep breath, released half of it, and squeezed the trigger. Her first shot hit dead center in the target. The second shot went through the same hole. By the 5th shot, Elena had created a single ragged hole in the center of the target that measured less than 2 inches across. The time for all 5 shots was 2 minutes and 37 seconds. Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez followed with his own sequence, shooting with the smooth precision that comes from years of experience. His group was excellent. All 5 shots in the 10 ring with a group size of just over 3 inches. His time was slightly faster than Elena's, at 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The second stage of the demonstration moved the targets out to 1,200 meters, where wind conditions and ballistic calculations became more critical factors. At this distance, small errors in judgment or execution would be magnified significantly. Elena could see General Harrison leaning forward in his observation post, clearly interested in how she would perform as the difficulty increased. Elena's shooting at 1,200 meters was even more impressive than her performance at the shorter distance. Her first shot hit slightly high and left of center, but she made a quick adjustment and put her remaining 4 shots into a group that measured just over 4 inches. Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez shot well, but his group was noticeably larger than Elena's, and 1 shot hit outside the 9 ring. The final stage of the demonstration was designed to be the ultimate test of both shooters' abilities. Targets at 1,800 meters in variable wind conditions, with a time limit that would prevent extensive range calculations. At this distance, both shooters would be operating at the extreme edge of their equipment's capabilities and their own skills. Elena knew that this was the moment that would define the entire demonstration. She spent extra time studying the wind conditions, noting how the flags at different distances showed varying wind speeds and directions. The ballistic calculation for 1,800 meters required adjustments for altitude, temperature, and the complex wind patterns in the valley. Elena's first shot at 1,800 meters missed the target completely, hitting low and to the right. She quickly analyzed the miss, made corrections to her scope settings, and fired again. The second shot hit the target in the 8 ring. Her third shot moved closer to center. By her 5th and final shot, Elena had worked her way into the 10 ring with a hit that General Harrison later described as impossible under the existing conditions. Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez struggled more at the extreme distance. His first 3 shots missed the target entirely, and his final 2 shots barely hit the scoring area. It was clear that 1,800 meters was beyond his comfortable operating range, despite his extensive experience and reputation. But General Harrison wasn't finished with his evaluation. As Elena and Rodriguez were preparing to pack up their equipment, Harrison appeared at their shooting position with a new challenge that no one had anticipated. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," Harrison said, studying Elena with an expression that was hard to read, "your performance today has been interesting, but I have one more test for you. I want to see how you handle a real tactical situation under pressure." Harrison pointed to a distant mountain peak that rose above the valley floor. "Intelligence reports suggest that there may be enemy observation posts on that ridgeline. I want you to glass that area and tell me what you see. If you identify legitimate targets, I want you to engage them at whatever distance you calculate." Elena felt her pulse quicken. Harrison was asking her to conduct actual combat operations as part of a demonstration. She looked through her spotting scope at the distant ridgeline and began searching for signs of enemy activity. The range to the mountain peak was enormous. Her rangefinder indicated distances of over 3,000 meters to various points on the ridge.
After several minutes of careful observation, Elena spotted movement near what appeared to be a natural rock formation. Through her rifle scope, she could see figures that appeared to be observing the American positions through optical equipment. Elena's training and combat experience told her that these were legitimate targets conducting surveillance of coalition forces. "Sir," Elena reported, "I have visual contact with what appears to be an enemy observation post at approximately 3,400 meters. I can see at least 2 individuals with optical equipment conducting surveillance of this position." Harrison studied the distant ridge through his own binoculars but couldn't clearly identify the targets that Elena was describing. "Rodriguez, are you certain that what you're seeing represents a legitimate threat?" Elena had learned to trust her instincts and her training. The figures on the distant ridge were clearly conducting military surveillance, and their location provided excellent observation of coalition force movements in the valley. "Sir, I assess these as legitimate military targets conducting reconnaissance of our positions." Harrison considered Elena's assessment for a long moment. This was exactly the kind of decision-making under pressure that he wanted to evaluate. "Rodriguez, what's the maximum effective range of your rifle?" "Sir, the Barrett M82A1 is effective against personnel targets out to approximately 2,000 meters under ideal conditions. Beyond that distance, environmental factors and ballistic limitations make precision engagement extremely difficult." Harrison smiled for the first time since Elena had met him. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, I want you to attempt to engage those targets. I understand that the range is beyond normal parameters, but I want to see what you and that rifle can actually accomplish under real-world conditions." Elena realized that Harrison was asking her to attempt something that was theoretically possible, but practically almost impossible. A successful engagement at over 3,400 meters would require perfect calculations, ideal conditions, and a significant amount of luck. A failure would be used as evidence that women couldn't perform under the ultimate pressure of combat. Elena studied the distant targets through her scope and began calculating the ballistic solution for what would be the longest shot of her career. The wind conditions were variable and difficult to read at such extreme range. The target was small and partially concealed. The bullet's flight time would be over 4 seconds, during which any movement by the target could cause a miss. But Elena had been preparing for this moment her entire life. Every shot she had taken with her grandfather in Texas, every round she had fired in training, every engagement she had completed in combat had led to this single opportunity to prove what she could accomplish with a rifle and the determination to succeed. Elena made her final adjustments to her scope, took account of every environmental factor she could measure or estimate, and settled into the shooting position that had become as natural to her as breathing. Through her scope, she could see one of the figures on the distant ridge moving slightly, presenting what might be her best opportunity for a successful engagement. General Harrison watched through his spotting scope as Elena prepared for what everyone present understood would be the most challenging shot anyone had ever attempted at this location. The distance was beyond anything in the training manuals. The conditions were marginal at best, and the consequences of success or failure would extend far beyond the immediate tactical situation. Elena controlled her breathing, settled her crosshairs on the distant target, and began the trigger squeeze that would change everything for women in combat roles throughout the American military. The shot that followed would become legendary, not just for its technical difficulty, but for what it represented about capability, determination, and the courage to attempt the impossible when everything important was at stake. Elena Rodriguez had fired thousands of rounds in her life, but none had ever carried the weight of this single shot. At 3,847 meters, the target on the distant mountain ridge was barely visible even through her high-powered scope. The wind was gusting unpredictably across the valley. The altitude was affecting her calculations in ways she could only estimate, and the eyes of a general who could end her career were watching her every move. Elena's final preparation took nearly 10 minutes. She calculated wind speed and direction at multiple points between her position and the target, estimated the effects of air density at altitude, and adjusted her scope for the extreme distance. The ballistic computer in her head, developed through years of shooting in challenging conditions, told her that the bullet would take approximately 4.2 seconds to reach the target, and would drop nearly 400 feet during its flight. General Harrison watched Elena's preparation with growing skepticism, and catch the tasks of decades on the distant and the smo of cons. This is the book. It's about history. Regardless of the shooter's skill level, with cons could shadows.
Rodriguez, Harrison said quietly, are you certain you want to attempt this shot? A miss at this distance would be completely understandable. Anne,